Hello, everyone. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at H.P. Lovecraft's seminal work of literary criticism, Supernatural Horror in Literature. In this text, Lovecraft is going to review the evolution of the genre of the weird tale, looking at the ancient historical, mythological, and cultural presumptions or traditions that underlie the weird tale, and how those elements of ancient history have played into the development of a particular style of literature, a style of architecture, a style of art generally, that culminates in this genre of the weird tale. So he's arguing that ultimately the same inclinations that resulted in or inspired our ancient ancestors to perceive the supernatural and the religious in their contexts has also been expressed in the development of the weird tale. And we're going to look at how his materialistic and atheistic presumptions about the world underlie the definition and the history that he provides of this literary genre. Now, Supernatural Horror in Fiction, this essay by Lovecraft, begins with what might be the most famous lines that Lovecraft ever penned. The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is a fear of the unknown. These facts few psychologists will dispute, and their admitted truth must establish for all time the genuineness and dignity of the weirdly horrible tale as a literary form. So from the outset of this text, H.P. Lovecraft is interested in essentially defending the value and the longevity of the weird tale. There's a concern that underlies that defense about the validity of the form in which he himself, as an author, is writing. There's a justification of the form and its evolution on a kind of pseudoscientific ground of psychology. He also provides us with not just a justification for the evolution of this tale, but an explanation as to why people would be interested in reading stories that are fundamentally disturbing. Why do people want to go to see a tragedy, for instance, when we know that the tragedy is only going to make us feel sad? Why do we read a piece of weird literature or a piece of horror literature when we understand that the characters are only going to be put through the most monstrous, horrifying, and disturbing situations that will result in what we would feel are negative sentiments on our part, right? We're going to feel a kind of proxy for or a parallel analog of the fear that the characters are experiencing. His argument is that ultimately it's a natural inclination. It's something that has to do with the way in which human beings evolved as a species. Now, Lovecraft lays out in paragraph 1 and 2 the definitions of two broad categories of literature. He says that there's one kind of literature that appeals to people who are caught within the spell of everyday life. They're not sufficiently detached from the everyday life. They're too concerned with the prosaic, mundane, boring issues of finances and romance and all those things that make up realistic literature. In his view, this kind of literature is unsophisticated. It appeals to the most common base emotions. But there's another form of literature, the weird and other elements of fantasy or the fantastic, that appeals to people with evolved artistic sensibilities who are interested in escape from this dull existence that we live, this workaday world. They need to be transported to emotional experiences and realms of consciousness that are beyond anything that we could actually experience in the real world. They need fantasy. But this kind of literature only appeals to a certain small subset of the population in the world. There are always going to be the vast majority of people who are dull and foolish, who are just interested in reading stories ultimately about themselves, about the concerns of finance and love. Think about the classic realist novels of, let's say, Jane Austen or of Charles Dickens. These are stories about, let's say, high class or low class people, but their concerns are about making their way in the world, finding out how they can live, finding a husband or a wife, as the case may be. It's all things with which we can relate because their experiences are ultimately ours. They might be living in a different social strata, but finding love, making your fortune, those are human experiences. Lovecraft and the weird tale are interested in things that transcend everyday experiences. In paragraphs 2 through 4, Lovecraft establishes the inclination or the reason behind this inclination of certain people towards the unknown, the bizarre, the weird. And he does so based on a kind of psychological analysis and an evolutionary biological analysis of the origin of human consciousness. Lovecraft, in paragraphs 2 through 4 says, man's first instincts and emotions formed his response to the environment in which he found himself. Definite feelings based on pleasure and pain grew up around the phenomena whose causes and effects he understood, whilst around those he did not understand, and the universe teemed with those in the early days, were naturally woven such personifications, marvelous interpretations, and sensations of awe and fear as would be hit upon by a race having few and simple ideas and limited experiences. Now, what Lovecraft is saying here is something that's quite common in the school of New Atheism, and it reflects Lovecraft's own atheistic sentiments. He's saying that ultimately, people were so ignorant in ages past that they looked at the world around themselves and could recognize pleasure and pain and the legitimate causes of it. I can understand what pain and pleasure are. When I feel the comforting warmth of a fire, I understand pleasure. When I put my hand into the fire and I feel pain, I understand that too, and I'm not going to do it again. And he says that this simplistic understanding of the world based on beneficent and maleficent elements of it, right, pleasure and pain, those things that can heal and can harm, also reflected in their understanding or their attempts at constructing a false understanding of those things that they didn't actually understand. So they constructed a conceptual schema for things like the weather, and they personified it. And they said, well, we see that we've had a bad crop this year. We see that the weather has been unpleasant. Maybe we can apply the same ideas of pleasure and pain, cause and effect to these things that we don't understand to the things that we can. And so invent an entire system of supernatural order to explain the unexplainable, to explain, fundamentally, the unknown. Likewise, Lovecraft says, our dreams gave our ancient ancestors an indication that there might be a world beyond the physical. Every night I go to sleep and close my eyes, I see that there's this fantastic realm that I can't understand that operates according to the logic of emotion. So these kind of confluence, or this confluence of influences from the vast spheres of the unknown that we have a natural inclination to personify and to neutralize by applying some kind of schema to, and also the realm of dreams, inclines us to the creation of a kind of mythology. The Weird Tale takes these ancient sentiments and then applies them in a literary form. The Weird Tale exists to capture, reflect, and respond to this primal, instinctual sentiment regarding the world. This sensation that there are things in the world that we don't understand, that are clawing at the edges of our understanding, and we try to neutralize the unknown by applying understanding to it. Now, in paragraph 4, he goes on to say, because we remember pain and the menace of death more vividly than pleasure, and because our feelings towards the beneficent aspects of the unknown have from the very first been captured and formalized by conventional religious rituals, it's fallen to the lot of the darker and more maleficent side of cosmic mystery to figure chiefly in our popular supernatural folklore. So people invent this massive realm of folklore to grapple with the negative aspects of the things that we can't explain. So we have religion capturing the positive aspects, and we have folklore and supernaturalism reflecting the negative aspects. So, children will always be afraid of the dark, and men with minds sensitive to hereditary impulses will always tremble at the thought of hidden and fathomless worlds of strange life which may pulsate in the gulfs beyond the stars, or press hideously upon our own globe in unholy dimensions which only the dead and the moonstruck can glimpse. So we have this world of fantastic evil possibilities that we can't understand because it's beyond the limited non-scientific understanding of our ancient ancestors. And so they invent this realm of religion to explain the positive elements, and they invent this realm of the supernatural to explain the negative.